People, for example, who are unable on their own to remove a face covering, they should not have one on. People for whom it presents difficulty with breathing should not be wearing them. The mayor's order is out and is available, and people should review it. What it is reflective of is that we are seeing this bump up in the number of cases. Unfortunately, at DDS, we are also seeing a slight bump up. So I'll just review for you our current status. As of yesterday afternoon, we have 223 people who have tested positive for COVID-19. That's 11 more than we reported a week ago. Of those 223, there are currently 4 who are hospitalized, 114 who have not required inpatient care, and 76 who have gotten inpatient care and have been released. 29 people who've been diagnosed with COVID-19 have died. Of those 29, 3 of them were people where we still have not gotten a report back from OCME whether their death was actually a result of COVID-19. In fact, in those cases, the person did not die with COVID-19. They had COVID-19 and recovered, but then died from, well, we will see from OCME whether they were whether it was a COVID-related death or not. So if you see that number go down in the future, that would be the reason for it going down. By facility type, we have had 93 people in supported living, 84 people in ICFs, 27 people in ResHabs, 14 in their natural home, 3 in a host home, and 2 in a nursing home. Among our provider staff, to date, there have been 243 provider staff who have tested positive for COVID-19, which includes 8 people who work at more than one provider. And unfortunately, we have lost 6 provider staff to COVID-19. Just an interesting thing to note as we talk about the fact that the numbers are bumping back up a little. If we look for folks supported by DDA, we saw our first COVID diagnoses in March, and in the month of March, we had 4 people. In the month of April, there were 140 with 18 deaths. In the month of May, we had 50 with 8 deaths, and then in June, it was down to 13. And to date, in July, it is now at 16. We've had 3 deaths in June and July, and all 3 of those deaths are people who had COVID, but it's not clear whether they are COVID-related deaths. And as I say, we will get a report from OCME about all 3 of those, and to the extent we have to would update that information. What this really highlights for us, which is something I think I've been trying to say every single week that we've been talking, is we are still fairly early in this public health emergency. A reminder, one of the actions the mayor took this week in her order was also to extend the public health emergency that was expiring in July. It has now been extended to October 9th. The changes that we have had to make to ensure the health and safety of, ourselves, the people we support, the community, including frequent hand washing, use of face covering, maintaining safe physical distance. These changes need to be a new way of life. We need to make sure that we've integrated these changes into our daily lives completely so that we reduce the risk that we will contract this and then subsequently transmit it to anyone else. It is really essential that we, as I say, there were 16 so far this month. It's really through good public health practices that we will keep that number down. And so we really need to be working on being vigilant about taking care of ourselves. There has been a group that we've talked about who has been focusing on the reopening day committee that's been doing a tremendous amount of work. They've developed the community participation assessment and questionnaire, and those are being conducted with the people we support to begin looking at what kinds of risks exist for each person in terms of engaging in the community, as well as, you know, what services would they benefit from, what are they interested in doing, and then getting to developing a plan with them for, you know, what changes might be made. In addition to that, there are two other undertakings of this committee. One of them, somewhat related to, pretty much related to that, has been something that this whole process has uncovered for us is, for one of the things we've said is that this community participation assessment and questionnaire is necessary for identifying day services. It isn't necessary for when a person who lives somewhere says, I want to walk to Starbucks today. One of the things I like doing that is important to me is to get my morning cup of coffee. All of us who work directly with people need to be equipped with the sort of the knowledge necessary to have the conversation with the person about their ability to do that activity that is important to them in a safe manner. We also need to know that to the extent we expect or want to impose restrictions that go beyond the restrictions that the mayor has imposed on all district residents, there are processes within DDA and providers to impose those restrictions. And before a restriction can be imposed, people need to go through that process. And so what we have done, and we had a great conversation yesterday with a fairly large representative group of people that included someone we support, a family member, provider staff, advocates, and DDS staff, to look at putting together a PowerPoint that will help us to have conversations. First of all, we're going to do the PowerPoint with service coordination here to make sure that they are well equipped to have these conversations, but we'll also be doing it with provider staff so that they are well equipped to have conversations with people about, you know, what are your choices? How do you make decisions about those choices? You know, what's interesting at this point in time is, in terms of decision making, there are currently limits on all of us, and we all have choices. The mayor imposed a mask order. A person could still choose to leave their home without a mask, and under that order, they could be fined. And what the order says, I believe, is up to $1,000. So does choice exist? Yes. But there is a mandate, and the mayor and the public health department have this public health authority to impose restrictions on all of us. What we need to remember is that the people we support have the same restrictions as the rest of us. And beyond that, how do we plan with them for how to keep themselves safe? So we are having our next meeting. We had a great discussion about really putting together a solid PowerPoint that will include some case scenarios to help people really flesh out these various discussions, to really understand what the issues are and how to have the discussions and how to make sure that everyone is aware of what people's rights are and how they are protected. I'm very hopeful that we'll finalize that PowerPoint next week, and then we'll be talking about going forward with scheduling these sessions with people. Another group has been working on creating documents on best practices for day providers. There have been a few day providers who have worked with us on that committee, as well as DDS staff. They had their final meeting this morning. So what we plan to do now, we're going to be forwarding that guidance up our chain here, but we are also going to devote this whole session next week to a discussion about day services and protecting people's health and safety in day services. And then from 1:30 to 3:30 next week, people should be getting an invitation, I'm hoping today, for providers to attend a discussion where we will really drill down into the guidance addresses 12 different areas that day providers need to be considering as they're looking at provision of day services in making sure that they're providing them in a safe manner. And so we will, with our day provider community, and I think it will be very helpful for all providers to participate, because it's not just because the day providers don't establish rules on their own, they coordinate with the residential provider. And as we do these community participation and assessment questionnaire, we then have the IDT meeting where everyone will come together and make a plan. And I think that this discussion will really inform how those plans are carried out. So that will be, we are expecting next week, as I say, to devote this whole time to a discussion about day services, and then to have that meeting where we really drill down into the guidance about day from 1:30 to 3:30. We received a question previously that I want to answer partially today, which was about the possibility of day providers who do employment readiness being able to do that remotely. The challenge with doing any day service remotely is, to the extent that service is provided to a person for whom we are paying for a residential service, they can't have residential staff paid at the same time that day staff are being paid, both by Medicaid. So for people who were remaining perhaps in a natural home, or for people who were in supported living and supported living periodic and don't have staff, they could participate in a waiver-funded remote employment readiness service. And I believe that there's not anything in our rule that puts a limit on whether that's direct or remote. The other option that we are working out the details for how we would implement it is that within RSA currently, we have a service called Job Readiness, which is very similar to, if not the same as, it's similar to employment readiness. And so what we will look at is qualifying all employment readiness providers as job readiness providers, and for people for whom participation in employment readiness remotely who are with a residential provider is appropriate, we could then look at issuing via vocational rehabilitation authorizations for job readiness services for those people. So that will at least be one aspect of this that I think we should be able to get moving, and we should have details on all the necessary next steps by next Friday. I think that's all I need to say. So now we could move on to any questions.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Will all persons supported receive a stimulus check? We have received a few checks from DDS client benefits account and are not sure if DDS is the payee for these funds for everyone. Is it possible for us to be provided with the list of people who can expect a check as people are asking for their stimulus money and we are not sure how to respond.
Whoever is the payee for the person's SSI or SSDI is the payee for the person's stimulus check. And so DDS sends to providers each month the $100 for the person where DDS is the rep payee. There are people who a family member is the rep payee, who someone else is the rep payee, so someone else may have received those funds. But providers should already know which people we are sending them monthly checks to. So that would be the list of people who are rep payees, for whom we are the rep payee. I do not know the logic in the order which checks are being sent out. We received a week ago like over 400, and those were forwarded on. So, as we receive them, we forward them on. When people ask when can they expect it, it is coming from the Federal Treasury, and it's coming in the order that they have established. I expect that everyone we support would be expecting a stimulus check, except if there were a person who had someone claiming them as a dependent on their taxes. Whoever claimed them as a dependent on their taxes would probably get the stimulus money. And that would be it. The other limitation on stimulus is that over a particular income, you don't get a stimulus check. But I don't think we have people who fall into that category. The stimulus funds start to go down at $75,000 a year and are not paid at all above, I think, $98,000 per year.
Will people be able to deposit their stimulus money without being penalized and spend the $1,200 over a year, as some service coordinators are stating that they will lose their benefits if over-resourced with the stimulus money?
So as I've said before, and I hope that we have service coordinators on this line as well, and our managers do meet regularly with service coordination, so they may need to clarify this. The stimulus funds are treated the same as any lump sum payment from Social Security, in which case you have a year. So, for a year, it doesn't count toward, for Medicaid or Social Security purposes, toward resources or income. You then do have to spend it after that because it will be counted the following year.
I need clarification if we unilaterally bill everyone for 90-day, or do we bill per person, each person's authorization?
So I'm assuming the reference to 90 days is related to the retainer payments. Just as a matter of an update, when we met with CMS last week, they said that they would get back to us with some clarification by early this week. Our definitions of early are different, but they have now gotten back to us this morning. And so we are putting together the responses to those so that we can submit and then hear back from CMS, we hope, next week. Retainer payments are available to day providers who provided a day service where the person since COVID-19 is not receiving a day service. There has to have been an authorization in place, and the person has to not now be receiving any day services from the provider they previously did or another provider. They can't be receiving day services. And if that is the case, then the claims for retainer payments can be submitted. And that's for essentially 90 days of service. It's 30 days of service, and we're allowed 3 periods of 30 days.
In regards to waiver companion rates, I'm asking if there's a rate change made due to different ratios of 1-to-1, 1-to-2, and 1-to-3. The rates were supposed to be amended, and I think this was done with the Appendix K, which was sent to CMS for approval. Has the approval been received?
This is what we received this morning from CMS, was their clarification regarding the one part of the Appendix K. So they've told us that they'll be back to us by late next week with any final questions they have about other aspects of our Appendix K. So our hope is that that means that that the approval of the full amended Appendix K would be by late next week. Keeping in mind, early this week was Friday morning. So what the definition of late next week will be, I cannot promise, but we are working today with DHCF on making the changes based on the information we got from CMS so that we can get that back in as soon as possible.
What if the person served decided to go into the community without a mask and gets fined? Would the provider be expected to pay the fine?
When people that we support drive a car and get a parking ticket, who pays it? To me, it seems like the exact same thing. And let me just say, to date, no one has been fined. So this is more of a hypothetical than anything. And I do know that those sanctions exist because of a concern if they need to be used. As a preliminary matter, it is possible that someone would say, hey, you need to have a mask on because you're out in public. And so the goal, I think, from DC Health from the beginning and from the mayor has been to encourage people to change their behavior to protect the whole community. And so they're not going to start with punishment. They're going to start with education.
Okay, any additional questions, please type that into the chat box. So for people on SSI, usually the SSA lump sum payments have to be spent down in 9 months, but the stimulus payments have a longer time to be spent down, which is 1 year. Is DDS sending people only $100 of their stimulus checks?
No, the stimulus checks are being forwarded. The reference to the $100 was as a reminder to providers, if they have questions about which people DDS is the rep payee for, each month when we get Social Security when we get an SSI or an SSDI payment, we retain those funds to pay for residential supports and then forward the $100 remaining to the provider to give to the person. So that was the $100 I was referencing. People are receiving, we are just forwarding on the full $1,200 stimulus check.
Any additional questions? If we have missing stimulus checks and DDS is the rep payee, hold on one second, it is, computer is jumping. If we have missing stimulus checks and DDS is the rep payee, who should we contact and will DDS follow up?
So I don't know that we would call it missing at this point. It is one that has not yet been issued. So people should contact Paula Lee if they've not, Paulette or Hall, I'm sorry. People should contact Paulette or Hall if they've not received it, and we will then, to the extent it appears that it's missing as opposed to not yet issued, then she or someone here at DDS would be following up on that. We have, as I said, I learned before, the reason for one person not getting a stimulus check is that in following up, we learned that someone was claiming them as a dependent. And just as a reminder to people, to claim someone as a dependent, you have to be paying for more than 50% of their care. So anyway, so in that instance, whoever claims them as a dependent receives the stimulus check.
For clarification, no one who we support received tickets. If we are in the community with a person who will not tolerate or refuses to wear a mask and the person gets fined, is the provider responsible for paying the fine?
Just to clarify a few things. First of all, the mayor's order does have a limitation on the requirement to wear a mask. Refusal is not an accepted, like an exception. However, there are exceptions for people with disabilities who have a medical reason that they cannot wear a mask. And what the mayor's order, it says, and I would encourage people to go to the coronavirus.dc.gov website and read the mayor's order. But what it says essentially is that for a person who has a disability, they should be then consulting with their medical provider about whether to wear a mask. And although I'm going to go ahead and pull it up now just to be sure that I'm not misspeaking in any way, and this is not in the order, this is Andy speaking here. If there's a person who is unable to wear a mask, we really need to consider what that means in terms of ensuring that person's safety and health. Because there certainly are people. If a person is not able to remove a mask on their own, that is an exception and that person should not be wearing a mask. If that is the case, we need to be taking really significant steps to make sure that that person is not within 6 feet of other people, except to the extent there may be people who have to provide direct personal care. And in those cases, those people would need to make sure that they're using the necessary personal protective equipment to ensure their safety as well as, that person's. So if I'll just walk through it since there seem to be some questions about this. Indoor wearing of masks. People must wear a mask in a common area of an apartment or condominium. So you don't put the mask on when you exit the building, you put the mask on when you exit your apartment. Any businesses, office buildings, or other establishments that are open to the public are required to post signage on their exterior doors stating that a person may not enter unless the person is wearing a mask. In addition, the business, office building, or other establishment is required to exclude or attempt to eject persons not wearing masks or who remove their mask. Employers are required to provide masks to their employees. Outdoors, people leaving their residence shall wear a mask when they are likely to come into contact with another person, such as being within 6 feet of another person for more than a fleeting time, and people who are operating or a passenger in a taxi or a vehicle, or who are a passenger on or operator of any kind of public transit must wear a mask at all times. Now, exceptions. A person who is actually eating, drinking, or legally smoking does not have to have on a mask, obviously. A person who is a resident or guest in a private home or an apartment. A person engaged in vigorous outdoor activity and is maintaining social distance of at least 6 feet from each other person. A person who is in the water at a swimming pool. A person who is in an enclosed office that no one else is permitted to enter. A person 2 years old or younger. A person unable to wear a mask due to a medical condition or disability, or who is physically unable to remove a mask. A person giving a speech for broadcast or an audience, provided that no one is within 6 feet of the speaker. A deaf person, interesting, they're not required in case they needed to read the lips of a speaker, although that requires the other person to remove their mask. The equipment required for a job precludes the wearing of a mask, and the person is wearing that equipment, or when wearing a mask would endanger public safety. If a person's been asked to remove the mask for facial recognition purposes. For example, when the police pull you over and they say, "I need to see your face," you can't say, "The mayor told me I need to wear a mask." So there is a provision here that says that the violations of this may be referred to the Office of the Attorney General. So I don't think I would spend a lot of time worrying about what happens if someone gets fined. I would spend much more time worried about, or focused on, not even worried about. As I said at the beginning, this is a reminder for all of us. It's early. This has to be a new way of living. It should be second nature that whenever you leave your home, you have a mask on. There may be people who can't use masks, and we need to be thinking with them about how that means they protect themselves and others.
Can you please clarify again who is eligible to apply for the relief funds?
So I assume they're referring, I don't remember the name of it exactly, the relief funds that are available directly from HHS to Medicaid providers, and it has to be providers who had Medicaid expenditures in 2019, and The deadline originally was the 20th of July, but that has been extended. And we have sent out to our provider community all of the information that we've received about these funds. So I just ask that you go back and review what we've sent out. There have been some phone calls that HHS has to provide education for people. But it has to be a Medicaid provider, and they have to have been a Medicaid provider in 2019, because the amount that an agency gets paid is based on their billing from 2019. It's 2% of their gross payments in 2019, I believe. So I'm sorry, just as a correction, for people who have missing or believe they have missing stimulus checks, you should contact Jared Morris at thomas.morris@dc.gov, or you can give him a call at 202-531-2859.
Do we know the date when stimulus checks should be distributed by? Have the Fed said anything about this date? I'm only asking now because there's discussion around another round of checks.
No, I don't know.
Okay, next question. For those who will not return to a day program setting until phase 4, what is the likelihood that they will be able to return to the same day program prior to COVID? For example, John Doe is in an ICF. He begins receiving companion services from his residential provider. Although the day program is able to provide those services, the residential provider has no visitor policy. Fast forward, there is now a cure, and COVID-19 is now a low priority. John Doe still misses his peers and would like to spend time with them again. However, the residential provider prefers to maintain the provided services.
So when we have, so the CPAC is the community participation and assessment and questionnaire should be done for everyone. And when we have the meeting, decisions are made, person-centered decisions are made. The provider's preferences about how they provide their services go into that discussion, but the decision that is made is based on looking at the risk to each individual person, not a blanket policy that no one can go out, because as I said before, you know, there's a mayor's order that addresses all of us really. And within the mayor's order, there is a restriction on people going out, but it also says, you know, except for employment or approved recreational activities. So the process of having the interdisciplinary team meeting and completing the assessment is about making a determination about whether those qualify as approved activities, and having the discussion with the person about what, you know, what they want to do. We've had interesting discussions about this recently, just in terms of really a good understanding of the role of everyone. The role of the team is to have the discussion with the person. We have circumstances where there's a legal decision maker, but that decision maker, for example, a guardian who's been appointed as a general guardian, that guardian's role is to make decisions in the person's best interest, consistent with the person's wishes to the extent they can be known. The role of that IDT, the interdisciplinary team, is to be the people who are closest to that person and would know what their wishes are to communicate them to the guardian, who then is obligated to see that they be carried out. We're all concerned about ensuring people's safety, but we can't forget along the way that each individual person should have choices and that we should be supporting them in those in safe ways. And this is a reason that we will have where we're developing this PowerPoint and having these discussions so that we can really, as a group in those sessions, talk through these issues and make sure that we're all on the same page and understanding them. Because decisions for every person we support are about the person. They're really, you know, the mayor can put public health restrictions in place for all of us. An individual provider has steps they have to take before they could impose any restrictions on a person.
Okay, right now I don't see our ASL interpreter. There he's back. He's back. In terms of Ms. Smith's question, isn't it true that ICFs cannot currently have a no visitor policy?
Yes, but. So let me just say, so following the mayor's order that was issued establishing phase 2 indicated that there would also be some DC health guidance forthcoming. Both the mayor's order and that DC health guidance are on our website, and those address the issues related to supported living and residential habilitation and provide guidance regarding visitors. There's clearly no restriction there, except, I won't say there's no restriction. What it walks through is, which is true for all of us, but what it includes is guidance that if a person is going to have a visitor, there's a preference that those visits should occur outdoors. To the extent that they cannot occur out, or, you know, if there's going to occur indoors, the preference would be that there be an identified location within the place for the visit to occur, perhaps in the person's room. Keeping in mind, supported living may be a person that lives on their own. So, you know, for a provider to say you can't have visitors is really not consistent. And this is one of the reasons that we're wanting to issue this guidance and have these discussions so that people are clear about this. But I also really want to walk through the mayor's order regarding phase 2 as it relates to ICFs, because I think that's important to remember. There is more of a limitation on ICFs, but prohibited is not the case, and our guidance addresses that, as well as the mayor's order addresses this. Hold on one second, because her order regarding phase 2 got bumped because of her order regarding face masks. I will say, as an initial matter, clearly preferred if people have visitors that those visits occur outdoors. There are people in an ICF who are unable to have a visit outdoors. There might be, unfortunately, we do have people, for example, who may be receiving hospice services who are not going to be going outside for a visit, and it would be very important in those instances that they be able to have a visitor. Any visitor, even a visitor that was coming to visit with someone outdoors, should be screened, so that you would be making sure that the person who's coming hasn't recently been in contact with anyone who's had COVID-19, is not currently ill, and check their temperature to ensure that they do not currently have a temperature. That's true for...
One moment, Andy. We lost our interpreter again. So, okay. I see you, Matt. Yeah.
So in our phase 2 guidance, we did address this. And if you go to our website under if you go up at the top, there's a link to all coronavirus information. And when you go there at the bottom, there's DDS guidance and there's phase 2 guidance. So people in ICFs should still schedule, being a little bit of a lawyer here. Should doesn't mean shall. Should means that it's recommended visits to occur outside the home while maintaining social distance and wearing a face covering. For example, invite a family member or friend on a walk in the community or visit with them on the deck or in the yard. This is for ICFs. There's the DC Health guidance that came out with supported living that also then covered reshabs. Visits conducted outdoors are still preferred. Being outdoors reduces the risk of transmission of COVID-19. You also need to think about but visitors are allowed. However, you need to think about the number of visitors. You need to make sure that there can be social distancing. You need to make sure that if you're in a place where there's shared living, that you're thinking about everyone who lives there, so that if the person comes in, they are going to then visit in a designated area, and that they won't have contact with the people who they're not visiting with, and that it's for the duration of that visit, in some way an isolated space, so that you're not putting anyone at risk, and that you're screening everyone who comes to the home. I'm sorry that I'm not giving a yes or no as an answer, but each of these are decisions that take a lot of factors into account. The health of the person, the risk of that person and the other people that they live with, the importance also of maintaining those relationships, because we're not going to be into phase 4 for quite some time. So the idea that we're going to say no visits occur until then is just a limitation that is not going to work. But we also need to make sure that we are taking every necessary step to ensure protection of people. Oh, and I didn't say, and should have, face covering while they are visiting. Maybe I said that, but it bears repeating. when anyone arrives to the home, they are to be screened, they are to wash their hands, they are to have face covering on whenever they're with the person. We do still want to limit visitors, especially to ICFs where you may have people at higher risk. But, you know, even with this question about day services, these decisions in each instance should be individualized. And so we should be thinking about the risk to the individual people. There may be circumstances also, this is addressed in our guidance, there may be circumstances where having a visitor is a lower risk activity than having a person go into the community. Lots of people know how desperate's too strong a word they were for their hairdresser to open back up again. The people we support likely feel the same way. Some people going out to a barber shop would present more of a risk. Some of our providers have relationships with barbers who come to the home. To the extent possible, you can sit on the deck and have your hair done outside. You know, there was something I was reading this week about the low transmission rate in those exact kind of circumstances where all the necessary measures were taken, wearing face covering, both people wearing face covering while it's being done, since it's obviously a close contact exchange. But each of those are individualized decisions, and they need to be made individually, and there cannot be sort of provider-wide prohibitions on no one can have a visitor. These kinds of things don't allow for the kinds of person-centered practices that I know we've come to expect for everyone we support.
Can you please clarify again whether CPAC applies to day services or to community participation, including informal volunteering or not? It seems as though the answer on this varies.
The Community Participation Assessment and Questionnaire applies to participation in day services. It doesn't apply to any activity that a person wants to engage in. In fact, I'm trying to remember which guidance it was in, but I'm very aware, there it is right there, that the guidance that we have provided says that the questions in the CPAC could serve as a helpful resource for people who are talking with a person about activities that they want to engage in. Like my example earlier, of the person for whom it is important to start every day by going to Starbucks and getting a cup of coffee and then coming home and sharing her coffee with her mother. A discussion between her and her mother about when she goes on the trip to Starbucks again is a discussion and doesn't require the CPAC. But the CPAC, if people are well familiar with it, would have really good guidance about making sure you're addressing all the questions that you want to address so that the person can participate in this activity in a safe way. But it is not intended to be a barrier to people engaging in other community activities. There are lots of community activities, just by the way, that people have been engaging in all along. You know, we have folks who have been working straight through. You know, we have people who work in jobs that were considered essential jobs, and therefore they continue to work during the stay-at-home order because they were authorized to continue to go to work. And in those instances, it was just very important to make sure that they understood the important steps to take to ensure their protection in getting to work and while they were at work. And they made the decision. Some people made a decision based on their own health that because they were higher risk and their concern that they were not going to continue working. Other people decided that work was very important to them and it was better for them to continue to work and that they would take the steps necessary to protect themselves and others while they did so. And I'll just say also the reason for developing this PowerPoint and having these discussions with all of service coordination, with our provider staff, is so that everyone is in a position to have the conversation and the discussion that I just had. Oh, I see that we're near the end of our hour. DHCF had shared some information with us that they had asked us to share with providers. They wanted us to remind all waiver providers to complete the DSP data form. To date, only 28 providers have submitted these forms, and these are due to DHCF. I'm the messenger here, so I can't really answer questions about it. But DHCF was confident that providers who are required to complete this form would know what I was talking about. So other than those 28, thank you to those 28. If others could complete those forms and submit them as soon as possible to DHCF. Okay, we are after 1 o'clock. So as I said, next week we will be devoting this time to talking about day services, and then we will have a special session, which the invitation should go out, I believe, this afternoon, for all of our providers to really drill down on the guidance for day service providers. So have a great weekend, everyone. Please stay safe out there, and I'll talk to you again next week.